So I really appreciate being here. I very much appreciate your reading all these books and talking about the ideas that I'm passionate about. So since you've been doing that, I thought I would speak very briefly and then open it up to a conversation. I'd rather be in dialogue with you than just present some kind of monologue. But it was suggested that I just set this up by introducing, or probably for most of you, reintroducing the notion of perennial wisdom. So in a nutshell, here is perennial wisdom. The idea is that religion comes from two sources. One, both of them human actually, but one are from people who are trying to design some kind of faith system that reinforces a specific power structure. So that's what we call parochial religion, whatever the religion is, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, it doesn't matter. The point of the religion is to bring you into that religion and keep you there. And they do that in all kinds of different ways. The other source for religion is what we call perennial. And what perennial means is that every time people go on a deep, contemplative, even mystical, spiritual search, they come to the same place, both, I would say, in consciousness, but also in ideas. And perennial wisdom are the 7 basic, of course, in the book you're reading, I think I have it 4. We broke them out. Frank and I made it into 7 to make it a little easier or more complicated. But perennial wisdom, I'll stick with the 4 that you've probably read. So from whatever tradition the mystic comes, whatever the practice the mystic uses, at some point, they all come to the same realization. And there's 4 points. So the first one is everything is a manifesting of the divine reality. So whatever that reality is called depends on the culture. So if you're Muslim, it's called Allah. If you're Hindu, it's called Brahman. If you're Jewish, it's the unpronounceable name of God. Sticking with the Jewish, the name of God, which in most English Bibles is translated Lord, the translation is horrible. It's completely misleading. Lord is a noun. The actual 4-letter name of God is a verb. Lord implies a hierarchy. The actual 4-letter name of God doesn't have a hierarchy. The 4-letter name of God in English letters, it's YHVH, or in Hebrew, Yud He Vav He. The actual name of God is derived from the verb to be. So God is being, but not a being, right? We're accustomed to talk about God as a being or the supreme being, but that's not what the name of God implies. What the name of God implies is that God is being itself. Everything, and especially this is very clear in the Jewish mystical tradition and others, but everything is a manifesting of this one reality, God. So that's the first point. Everything is God. The analogy I like best comes from Hinduism. It's the analogy of the ocean and the wave, that just as every wave is the waving of the ocean, everything in the universe, you and I, animate objects, inanimate objects, sentient beings, non-sentient beings, everything in the universe is a waving of the divine. That's point 1. Point 2, human beings are innately capable of realizing this. You don't need you don't need a guru, you don't need a swami, you don't need a pastor or a priest or a rabbi or an imam. Every human being is intrinsically capable of realizing this. And I would go even further and say that almost every human being has had a taste of this at some point in their life. Maybe when we were babies. The argument between Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud was Sigmund Freud said that spirituality was an infantilizing experience because it brought you back to the experience you had in the mother's womb. Jung said that that was a maturing experience, but because you had that experience of oneness and comfort and safety, but you had it as an adult. It didn't make you less of an adult. It opened you up to this greater reality that left you with an indelible sense and I think unshakable conviction that everything is part of God, and there's a deep comfort in knowing that. So people are intrinsically capable of knowing that. Number 3, when you know it, it carries an obligation. All right, it's not just, oh, everything's God. Okay, I'm done. Knowing that everything is a part of this singular reality obligates us to engage with everything in a certain way. Now, I'm going to use biblical language because it's easier for me and probably for you. But it means, and there's different ways of putting it, but basically it means from Genesis 12, verse 3, being a blessing to all the families of the earth. And the guide for that is the golden rule. Right? Don't, in the Jewish way of, it's in the negative in Judaism, don't do unto others as you would not want others to do unto you. But however you frame the rule, it's the same idea. Realizing that everything is part of this one reality obligates you to treat everything as you would want to be treated, because when you treat another, you're also treating yourself, because it's just this one thing. So being a blessing, making the world a little better for your having been born into it. That's point 3. And then the 4th point is, this is why you exist. This is why you're on the planet. This is why God manifests you. We have a tendency to think that we're here to be somewhere else. Now, somewhere else could be another life. It could be heaven. It could be, you might decide that somewhere else for some people is really hell. So whatever you have in mind. But the perennial tradition says, no, you're not here to go somewhere else. This is not a stepping stone to somewhere else. This is the very purpose of your existence, is to be here in such a way as to be a blessing, to be here in such a way as to make the world a little better for your having been here, to be here in such a way where loving neighbor and loving stranger, and as Jesus added, loving your enemy, is what it is to be a human being. And that's it. I mean, those are the 4 points. Everything is an expression of one thing. You can know that directly, not as an idea, but as a felt reality. 3, knowing it directly obligates you to a certain way of behaving in the world. And knowing the divine, or put it this way, knowing God and acting godly, is the reason you're here. Every religion, though each one articulates it in its own way, given its own culture, its own language, every religion comes to the same point. And if you've been reading the World Wisdom Bible, you should have some inkling of that. We tend to think of religions as competing brands, but they're not. They're simply, at their best, at their worst, they're competing brands. They compete among them, between religions. There's competition within religions. But at their best, religions are not competing brands. They're simply different ways of articulating a universal truth. And the people that I find the most compelling within any religion are the mystics, because the mystics are the ones who realize they're not promoting a competing brand, that they're simply articulating in the language that they've inherited from the tradition in which they find themselves, the universal truths of perennial wisdom. I'm going to say one more thing about that, and then I'll see if there's any questions on that, and let the conversation go where you'd like it to go for the next half hour or so. In 1984, I was invited by Father Thomas Keating to join a group called the Snowmass Group. Snowmass was where his monastery was. And what he wanted to do was he wanted to invite 12 contemplatives from 12 different traditions to live with him in the monastery for 10 days, follow the life of the monks. When they prayed, we prayed. But when they were working, we were meditating together and in dialogue with one another. And the question that he posed, now this lasted 35 years. He did it every year for 35. The question he posed at the very first one was, are we experiencing something different from one another when we practice our contemplative practices? So Father Thomas Keating is one of the founders with Father Basil Pennington of centering prayer, Christian centering prayer. So he's doing centering prayer. I'm doing a Jewish meditation. There were, I don't know if you know the name, but Pema Chodron was there. She was doing Tibetan meditation. We had people from a variety, 12 different traditions, each doing her own thing. And then the question was, so what are you experiencing? And is what you're experiencing different than what I'm experiencing? It took 10 minutes to realize we were all having the same experience. And the experience was one of dropping all of the labels that defined us, experiencing this oneness of the divine reality, and then returning to our labeled self with a renewed sense of commitment to being a blessing to all the families of the earth. Again, each person expressed it in his or her own way, but we were all having the same experience. And I knew that intellectually, but sitting with these amazing teachers and having them say, this is what happened to me, and the next one saying, oh, that's what happened to me, that was a confirmation that I didn't know I needed. Maybe I didn't need it intellectually, but absolutely needed it on a deep spiritual level, so that I knew that what I was experiencing wasn't unique to me and wasn't unique to my tradition, my religion, but was in fact universal. So the Snowmass group, like I said, lasted 35 years, right up until just a few years before Father Thomas's death. I didn't go every year, but I went for the first few years, and I went back for the big anniversary years. And he really was perhaps the first to I don't know if you can use the word prove, but he was the first to provide a testing ground for the claims of perennial wisdom. And I think he proved that what perennial wisdom says is in fact true. So my mission and Frank's mission, since we got together and recreated the One River Foundation a few years ago, has been to bring perennial wisdom to the world. Not any one version of it, but the idea itself, and then to encourage people to find it in their own tradition and to really root their own religion and their own personal spiritual practice, either in their own tradition's articulation of perennial wisdom or some other. But we're really on a path or on a mission to help Christians find perennial Christianity, Hindus find perennial Hinduism, etc. So I'm going to stop there because I really would rather talk with you than at you. So is that good enough to get us started?